Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Etchr class. My name is Kitty, and I will be your host. We are here with the fabulous Kathleen, who is going to be teaching us how to paint a fun scene on our sketchbooks. So if you have any questions for Kathleen, please put them in the chat in all capital letters so they can see them better. And if the question is relevant to what she's doing at the moment, I will ask at that time. If not, I'm going to hold off those questions until the end. We do our question and answer session. So from here, I'm going to hand it over to Kathleen, who's going to tell us more about what we're going to do today.
Yay! Hello, everyone. My name is Kathleen. I am a biologist and an artist. And I started my art educator journey by teaching kids. So it's kind of a bit of a challenge when you're teaching kids, right? You have to really break things down easily. But that kind of helped me to guide them and also for adults. So I'm a biologist, so I definitely love life, anything about the study about life. So it fascinates me. Birds, name it. It's just everything is just gorgeous. It's like whenever I see anything that's moving or not moving, it was as long as it has life, it just fascinates me. The story behind it, and it just prompts me to this prompted me to paint them and illustrate these gorgeous organisms and species so that people can appreciate it. And that started my whole how do you call this, a vision or kind of like goal to promote biodiversity and the knowledge for our local biodiversity, so more focused on Philippine biodiversity and such. And if you're an artist who does the same, so kudos to you. There's a lot of things that we can do for our environment, and I figured that visual arts was just one of the things that relate most to the layman. So yeah, that's pretty much about me. Today we're going to be hello everybody, by the way, in the chat. so um so today we're going to be talking about acrylics and how to paint foliage in acrylics. And it's pretty exciting because it looks like an easy task to do. It looks foliage just looks amazing. It looks easy to do, but when I taught this with kids, there are a lot of pain points that we can actually address, and it's kind of the same with kind of the same struggles with adults. So today we're going to be doing foliage with acrylics, how to paint them naturally, and most importantly, all of these techniques you're going to be learning today can be applied to watercolor and gouache and other mediums as well that uses paintbrush apparently. But that's pretty much it. So if you're going to be following along today, make sure you have your loose sheets of paper with you so that you can practice your acrylics. All of those are in the PDF that is in the chat that Kitty has dropped in the chat. And today, this is going to be my canvas. My camera is not doing justice, but these are A6-sized Etchr Lab sketchbooks. If you're going to be following along today and decide to do the same, make sure that these are primed. Later on, I'm gonna show you a messy way to prime these sketchbooks. But if you don't have that, a regular canvas pad or canvas panel or canvas board would be fine. So I think that's pretty much it for me. So let us get started.
All right, here we go.
Okay, so this is the sample image of what we're going to be doing today, sample output. And this is the final piece. Let's go ahead and start with the materials first. So the materials for the brushes, I'm using cheap brushes you can find in your art stores. And I find it pretty useful for these kinds of techniques, foliage techniques. These are the brushes that you wouldn't want to use in watercolor and is kind of like hard to touch. These are flat brushes. So one is branded, a Donna Dewberry Pro, used in one single stroke painting, and the other is just a regular flat brush from the craft store. I prefer the cheaper one for these techniques again. But of course, these have plenty of uses, but for foliage, I prefer the cheaper ones for these. This is a watercolor brush, Porciani Bonazzi size 10. It's a filbert brush. It has this rounded corner at the top. There we go. And later on, you're going to be figuring out how we can use it. So let's refocus. There we go. And next up, we're going to be using a cheap fan brush. again from the craft store. I don't know any brands of these, honestly, so you can just use any brushes from the craft store. But if you have the Etchr watercolor set, you can use the, let's open it, there we go, fan brush from the kit. Mine is a little dirty. I'm pretty sure yours are too. um, all right, so that's pretty much what I'm going to be getting from the watercolor set. And I'm going to be getting the rigger brush from the gouache brush set. So this is the rigger brush size 2, I believe. And later on, we're going to be using this for the branches. So the rigger brush is kind of has a longer, what do you call this, bristle. No, it's, sorry, I'm just going to answer the question real quick. So will some will be watercolor? No, it's not. It's going to be acrylic for today's class, but you can use these similar techniques that we're going to be learning today for other mediums as well. This is the brand that I'm going to be using today, Liquitex. I find it okay for, it's a kind of transition, sits in between student grade and professional grade. So, and also Amsterdam acrylics. And I chose these range of colors specifically for the piece. All of those, again, are in the PDF. So mostly warm colors. Yeah. For our loose sheets of paper, I'm using the Watercolor Block. I know it's for watercolor, but again, I just love how thick the paper is. And as you can see, I made it as an exercise. It's a watercolor block, and it looks like a sketchbook because it has these glue at the top and at the bottom part. And there we go. And you can remove the paper on top of it using a palette knife, or you can just remove the bottom part so that it kind of flips like a sketchbook. So I have my own sketchbook, so I'm able to use my both of these sides. But yeah, this is originally a watercolor block, so you may opt to remove the paper on the top of it. This is a sample class output. This is an A6 sketchbook from Etchr in the landscape format. And this is the class output today. It's in the portrait format. And yeah, there we go. I covered it because I figured that my sketchbooks often become dirty. So that's one of the fun ways for you to cover them and make it look more presentable. This is an example of a blank Etchr sketchbook, and it's kind of like fabric or cloth when it comes to the texture, and it has these has a lot of tooth, and so that's the main reason why I needed to prime it, so that it lessens the texture at least and helps me glide the brushes more smoothly. Otherwise, if you don't have that, this canvas panel would be good, or canvas papers for acrylics would be good. So this is just me showing you a normal day, messy way of priming the sketchbook. And it's just for me to make the layers more prepped for acrylics. And I'm using a white gesso here, but you can gessos are available in different colors if I'm not mistaken. So the other sketchbook I have, I used black gesso for that. But for this, I layered 3 layers for the priming, I believe. So yeah, so for today, we're going to be transitioning your knowledge from watercolor foliage to acrylic foliage so that we can achieve these gorgeous natural looking. And it's kind of different approach for the different mediums, but it's pretty much what you're going to be learning today, again, is pretty much applicable for the other mediums as well. Okay, so here we're just going to be doing some talking points before we start with some exercises. This is the blank sketchbook, and it's on portrait. And yeah, it's kind of different with what I did here in the other sketchbook, which is the landscape format, because I lined it with masking tape and just painted the center of it. And it's kind of like just a suggestion of a foggy mountain, and there's a tree at the middle, if you can see that, if you squint a little bit. So yeah, that's a landscape, one of my favorite shots. So I decided to paint that and just varnished that with whichever varnish you prefer, be it glossy, satin, or matte. So there's that, pretty much it for the introduction. Um, and again, if you don't have those, a canvas panel or a regular canvas would do. Yeah. So a few talking points for transitioning your knowledge. If you're used to watercolor or gouache, then we're just going to be talking about quickly the differences between watercolor and acrylics. So for watercolor, usually you work from light to dark, which makes sense because you have to reserve the lightest area and you usually need to plan ahead. And this is the reason why I made this cheat sheet for the kids that I did a workshop with before. So we're just gonna go over them real quick. So here, you're just, for the colors, you need to prepare or assign the lightest tones, the midtones, and the dark tones. Usually I just use the greens. And then for the leaf textures, you can make that with watercolor by dropping several, well, laying down several droplets of paints and connecting them in a random fashion. And here I'm just showing you how to tap, 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 and do that and connect that. There we go. And so once you have connected that, it's going to make this impression of a really gorgeous foliage. And so for the trunks, it's just a matter or a question of pressure, really, for the trunks. Pressure you give in your brush. There we go. Because the more pressure you give, you create thicker lines, and then less pressure gives thinner lines. And usually in watercolor, I don't paint trunks in detail, especially if they're far away. But later on, I'm going to show you if it's like in the foreground. So this is just an example of a bush, which where I incorporated all of these techniques and other textures. And also I showed here the common color choices I use for painting trees. So that's in watercolor. Usually you go from light to dark, plan ahead, and make textures using round brushes most of the time. When observing trees, you have to take note of the shape of the trees, because by taking note of the shape of the tree, when the light hits at a certain point, you would know where to add the shadows, the highlights. And with acrylic, it's really fun because most of the time when the trees are clumped together, they're irregular shaped. So it's really freeing whenever you're doing that. And here's an example of when the trunks are in foreground in watercolor. So if it has a green undertone, it gives this mossy forest kind of vibe. And then if it has an orange undertone, it's kind of warm. It reminds me of a tropical country, trees in a tropical country or something of that sort. And if it has a blue undertone, it reminds me of a winter scene or trees that are kind of used to the cold temperature or something like that. So yeah. And as you can see here, I laid down the lightest tone first, and before I was able to lay down the darkest tone. So that's with watercolor. With gouache, however, it gives this matte kind of texture, and it's okay for you to not go from light to dark all the time. Usually you follow the same concept with acrylic and watercolor, which is background to foreground. And the beauty for gouache is you're able to lift the texture and give emphasis to the highlights, just as you can create the same with acrylics. And as you can see, the close-up here, it's just a collection of textures from the brushes or brush strokes. And I didn't paint each and every leaf one by one. So you definitely can do the same with acrylics later on. And yeah, so let me show you in acrylics. It's usually the most vibrant most of the time. Um, and that's we're going from background to foreground and the darkest to the lightest. But we're going to be debunking that theory because it's not true for most of the time. So let's start with the simple exercises that we're going to be doing. We're going to be experimenting with the effects of each brush. I'm squeezing paint on my made up palette. This is just a black canvas wrapped in a plastic, wrapped in plastic. So if you're asking about the palette, that's usually just made up. I enjoy using paper plates for my palette whenever it's acrylic so that I can throw it away, but up to you. So for the first one, we're going to be testing the round brush or the brushes that you usually murder. I call it murdered brushes. So this is rough. It has a rough texture, and we're going to be making use of the tip of the brushes. And it's similar with this. This is a flat brush, but it doesn't look like a flat brush anymore because I obviously used it a lot. And here's a smaller version of the first one that I showed. Again, these are cheap brushes from the craft store. First step I'm going to be doing is to make sure that I don't have moisture or water in my brush. So make sure you have a towel handy. And I'm grabbing green paint here, but I'm noticing that I have too much water, as you can see here in my palette. So I'm just going to grab my tissue and tap it here. And just try to hold it in a 90-degree manner. And I'm realizing that it still has too much water. So I'm just going to tap it here and create a new mix with black so that it doesn't have too much moisture. So we don't want that. We are after this satin texture, honey texture. There we go. And just tap it lightly. There we go. That's the beauty of these round brushes, these murdered brushes, because as you can see, the bristles in the center are the ones that are mostly darker, and the ones that are outside it just feathers out naturally in a natural manner. And all you have to do is find this perfect pattern and manner of tapping it onto your paper. So what I usually recommend is holding it in a 45-degree manner if you're tapping it. You want to tap it lightly in your hand. And there's this sort of pattern that you also have to follow. So if you're just going to tap it, but you don't follow this certain pattern, you're just going to be making like a line or a shape. So yeah, I'm just showing that here. So I just created a line here, which is the common mistakes most of my students create, especially kids. So what I would recommend or tell them is to create this sort of pattern in mind whenever you're painting. So do a zigzag or wave-like pattern so that you don't stay in one direction and your mind is not routed to form a line instantly. So I'm just exaggerating it here, but as you can see, it helps. No, I don't have paint. It helps if you do a wave-like pattern or move your brush in a wave-like fashion so that it doesn't stay in one place and your paints won't clump in one direction. So I also find it easier for me to blend it or tap it in a wave-like manner, like this one here. There we go. So it's kind of like circling. That way your brush doesn't stop in a single direction. And yeah, so these look more natural than the ones that we did here in the first one, which is kind of like just a straight line. Now, common mistake is to put a lot of pressure in your brush. Now, don't do that because you're making just a whole block of shape here. And that defeats the purpose of making use of the tip of the brush here, because that's the most useful tool that we have here. And what happens is if you layered the highlights on top of that, it just mixes and mushes it up together, and doesn't look natural at all. So what you want to do is, again, tap and do this wave-like fashion. I'm using Liquitex paints. There we go. Oh yeah, acrylic. I'm sorry. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the round brushes and the general pattern for round brushes. Now for the flat brush, I think we're going to explore the flat brush next. So let me just, oh, sorry. This is perfect. The round brushes is perfect for these kinds of reference images because it helps you not to, press on each and every detail. So this helps you create that beautiful impression. And you can also see those in bushes and everything actually, but it just depends on what color you'd prefer to use. So that's pretty much it. Onto the flat brushes. So right now we're using the Donna Dewberry Pro, which is used for one-stroke painting, if you're familiar with that. The Chinese technique of one-stroke painting for acrylics. So I'm going to be probably doing a showdown with this cheaper version of the brush, and let's see how they go. They do. So with this brush, the first one is Donna Dewberry, and now you can see why it's used in single stroke painting because it creates this lovely gradient right here. And that's usually used for making backgrounds, gradients, and also your first layer for your grass, say for example. But the cheap one you can also use for short grasses. So I'm just going to grab paint and tap excess paint on my tissue and just do quick flick motions. And that already is a suggestion of grass. Now, you just have to find the perfect recipe for you to be able to create those long strands or short strands depending on what kind of grasses you're making. There we go. So that's one way for you to achieve that effect. Or you can also use it or hold the brush sideways. There we go. And by layering different colors, you're just creating depth to it. You already have a suggestion of a gorgeous grass. So that's for your flat brushes. Now, Borchani Bonazzi filbert brush. You're curious what this is about. This is a watercolor brush. What is it doing here? Well, it's gorgeous for trees in the distance, essentially. So I'm just gonna grab that, and you see that kind of curved effect. I love that. So it reminds me of this Oriental Chinese painting technique when making trees. So by layering them in a triangular fashion, it creates this tree already. So yeah, it reminds me of an acacia tree probably. So yeah, it's really gorgeous. And you want to use this filbert brush for those kinds of trees that have a lot of flowers on top. Later on, we're going to be using this one as well. So yeah. There we go. And we're just going to be layering different colors here. So you can use different colors for the meantime because this is just an exercise, but I'm just helping you envision what this is. So these are the fan brushes from Etchr and the cheap one. And when you wet the fan brush, usually it creates this kind of like claw-like effect. So the main thing about fan brushes is the bristles that are in the middle are the ones that are mostly in contact with the paper. So the bristles that are outside are in less contact. So it creates this beautiful gradient, and it has the same effect, kind of the same effect with the round brushes, except that it's in a line. So instead of in a circle, it's in a line. The gradient is in a line. So this is perfect for trees that are spreading out. If you want like small suggestion of grass, that can be done as well with these fan brushes. Now, when you can also tilt it to the side to create single and more specific and isolated leaf textures. And when you're using watercolor brushes for your acrylics, make sure to wash them right away because we want to take care of those. And yeah, this is one of the techniques used by oil painters when creating subtle and very delicate highlights for your details. You can also use these as grass, as you can see what I'm doing here, short grass, if you want that kind of effect. Okay, and next up we're going to be using this rigger brush. So a rigger brush has like a long bristle, and you don't want to hold it near the bristle. You want to hold it kind of away or like towards the end, because in that sense, it's kind of like you're giving permission for the or the rigger brush to take control, and by it's commonly used by, as you can see here, calligraphy artists. But if you hold it more farther away from the bristles, the shape that you're creating for the branches are more organic, it's more natural. So yeah, and here I'm just demonstrating how I usually hold it. You can also use a typical round brush right here, so just a mix of brown and black, but it creates this chunky trunk. So it really is a test of how much pressure you're putting on your brush as well. There we go. And so several layers of that creates this gorgeous branches, and it's perfect for the branches that are farther in the distance. There we go. So just keep practicing that, and you're going to be able to master this. I'm just going to do a quick branch for this lovely tree here because I already started it. So that will be perfect. Okay. And that's pretty much it for all of your brushes and what they do and how you can use them for your foliage painting. There we go. So there are two approaches usually for painting when you're looking at a reference photo or even if you're painting live. So there are usually two approaches. One is going or painting the mid-tone first, then adding the darkest tones or the shadows and the lightest tones, which is the highlight, or the usual dark to light. So in which case should you use which approach? Is that clear? So in this kind of reference photo, I'm just gonna show it quickly. As you can see here, there are more the middle tone, the mid-tone is more abundant than the highlights and the shadows. So in this case, it will be logical for you to start with the mid-tone or block off the mid-tones first. Compared to this image, especially if you have high contrast in image, it would make sense for you to go from dark to light, for you to establish the dark background first so that the highlights would be seen or be emphasized. And here you can use the fan brush techniques or the round brushes for this. But yeah, so I'm just going to be demonstrating how you can use this approach, the mid-tone, dark to light. And if you want to follow along, that's okay. But I want you to observe how I usually use the tapping technique whenever I'm painting. And I don't copy as is for the foliage because I find it harder for me to make it look more natural or organic whenever I'm doing that. So I realized that this is a little bit more green. So I'm adding more yellow to the midtone. And starting off with the darkest area first because your paint is loaded, or your brush is loaded with paint. So you want to leave off or start off with the area that is darkest. So as I go out, as you can see, I do this tapping motion the zigzag tapping motion, and whenever I'm going towards the border, I also do this kind of light taps later on. Here I'm putting more pressure because it's just blocking off the shape. So um, there we go. And I'm going out every now and then because I noticed that this shape is becoming more defined, and I don't want that for a foliage. I want it more scattered, and yeah, so I'm just taking out the brush every now and then in certain areas. There we go. And that's pretty much your base color. So now we're just going to add the darkest tones, which is black, usually black mixed with the color of the midtone. There we go. So just a perfect mix for that. Now this is a bit contrasted, so later on I might add some sort of transition as well between the darkest tone and the midtone. So I'm just gonna tap in and observe where the darkest areas are. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. Nobody knows the exact tree that you've copied this from. Um, so yeah, the most important thing is that it makes sense to you. And here I'm just mixing a color for the transition between the darkest tone to my mid-tone. So it's a mid-tone. That's so weird, but yeah, I wanted to have that more of an olive green kind of shade. So, and just a note that the more paint that you mix with your brush, the more it kind of clumps together. So you need to be aware of that when using this round brush, because in that sense, the tip of this round brush would not be frayed enough for you to create this foliage effect. So right now what I showed there is, or pointed there, was that I clumped it a bit. So I'm learning from my mistakes. I'm just going to leave it there and fix that later. So here is an attempt to do a highlight. Do not make the same mistake. I tried to not wash my brush, use the spare paint that I have in my brush and mixed it with white. Apparently that's not as bright and light as I expected it to be, so I tried mixing it with yellow. It still isn't. And so I learned my lesson, and I just I'm gonna wash my brush and make a fresh start, or a fresh mix of paint. So that's yellow and white right here, and that gave me the exact color that I'm looking for. There we go. So I'm just gonna tap, not type, tap that in areas where I see the highlights, or usually almost at the end. So this is, I'm holding the brush almost at the end and just using my finger to tap it. And as you can see, the more that you go towards the highlight, the lesser area you're moving into. So right now I'm just tapping it on the edges. And yeah, it kind of looks like the reference image that I have right here, but not exactly. But at least I get the gist of it, right? It's already a suggestion of what is going on here. You understand that this is a foliage. This is a tree probably, so just add a branch later on, then that already makes sense. So that's pretty much the technique here when doing or blocking off the midtone first, so that it's easier for you to add in the dark and the lightest areas in a subtle manner. So now I'm going to be demonstrating the usual pattern of approach, rather, of dark to light. So in this case, it's a high contrast image. I'm just going to do a section of it. And this is one of my favorite kinds of reference photos, by the way, because I'm able to really demonstrate the foliage effect later on. So I'm just going to block off the shape of the branches with the rigger brush, using the knowledge, using the technique we learned earlier. So as you can see, I'm holding it almost at the tip. It makes it more organic because I have no control of this. I'm not holding it like a pen, like I'm writing. So what I'm doing is I'm blocking off the shape as well. And since I'm going to be covering more areas, I'm going to switch my brush already. So just going to cover these in. These are areas where there are leaves at the background. And also these darkest areas. It's okay for you to go or color in the areas where the highlights are, because again, for you to be able to emphasize them or give, you know, give emphasis to them, you need to be able to establish first the darkest backgrounds so you can have that high contrast. There we go. So that's all of the black areas, and it's covering mostly everything. Now it's just a hot mess that we have right here. Now, as you can see, I kind of like pictured a square, cut off a square from the reference image. So I'm now in the midtones. So for the midtone, I think of it as kind of like where the baby will be sleeping. So it's kind of like the bed of the baby. And if you don't put enough bed for your, well, if you don't have a bed for your baby will be positioned awkwardly, kind of like that. So I treat my midtones as the bed and the highlights as the baby. So if you don't put your midtones first in the areas where the highlights or the babies will be, then the highlights will be in an awkward position, and you don't want that. So you put your midtones where, even on places where your highlights will be. So I'm using the round brush here for the midtones, and later on I'm going to show you a trick on how to make it easier for you to understand foliage for reference photos. But for now, I'm just going to show you the midtones part and how I use the brushes. There's also highlights in this area, so I'm just going to have to establish the midtones there. Now, I'm going to switch brush real quick because I want that drooping kind of effect of the leaves. You know how in some trees, the leaves are kind of like drooping down. It's kind of sad. And I want that kind of effect. So I'm thinking a fan brush maybe would help me achieve that, because this round brush won't let me do that, right? It's when I drag this down, it's just going to make this whole mess of dragging. So I think I'm going to be using that fan brush later on. So in the meantime, I'm just going to keep establishing the highlights. I think I'm in the highlights now because I'm adding the white already. There we go. So I'm just going to add the highlights here on certain areas, and usually at the top of these clumps. I see the foliage or the areas of these trees as clumps or circles, and you just use the tip so that it there we go, so that it creates that beautiful leaf-like effect. And if your layers underneath are still wet, you would notice that, because it usually blends in with your highlights and it just covers up the yellow with this mushy color, and we don't want that. So if that's the case, you need to let your first layer dry. Now I'm using the fan brush because, again, I wanted that drooping effect, and only the fan brush can create that. So I'm just going to do quick flicks, but going in a downwards direction. I'm tilting it sideways as well to create, isolated areas of those leaves. And so I'm just doing it point one by one. So the difference with using a fan brush and a round brush. With a fan brush, if you tilt this and do it in an isolated area, you're not doing each leaf one by one still, because it has still a lot of bristles that might touch it. So it's easier for you in this case. And I switched to the round brush because I want the highlights to be a little heavy. And I wanted that isolated kind of highlight in certain areas or clusters. So I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to do the background real quick so that you'll be able to kind of get the feel of the whole picture, and we're actually done. So what I could have done better is I would have probably added more white for the highlights so that it is more contrasted. But again, nobody knows your reference photo. Nobody knows how the actual image looks like. The first thing that people will see when they see your work is they're not going to ask for the reference photo, especially if it's foliage. So yeah, don't stress about not copying the exact same thing, because it's that's the beauty of your artwork. It's kind of like nature, it has its own beauty. So earlier I told you I'm just gonna show you an observation technique that I usually teach my students. So in this reference photo, say for example, there are lots of areas where there's highlights and shadows. This is just a quick sketch. So usually I just block the general shape and I look at these. I find certain shapes or circles or clusters. So this one's an oblong, this is a circle, and then I block down the tonal values. So you have the midtones, the dark tones, and then there are areas where, the darkest areas. So I'm just gonna take a note or sketch that here. And here I'm just going to reestablish these shapes. So this is a circle, this is a circle, another circle, and within that circle there are tons of tonal values, and that pretty much guides you to creating this foliage effect. And so whatever color is assigned to this specific tonal value, say for example this is a light tonal value, if it's a green color there, then you just need to choose the lightest tonal value for the greens. So let's try to paint using this kind of method. So I know that this darkest areas are probably the black color. And if you're going to do this in watercolor, you might need to reserve a lot of areas. So that's the beauty of doing it in acrylic or in gouache, because you're able to layer on top of another layer. So. And I also laid down black on the darkest areas of each cluster. So switching to green, I'm just going to reestablish the darkest areas within each shape. There are darkest tones. And this is a quick sketch. So as you can see, I'm pushing down on the brush. But yeah. So establishing the darkest tones. And then moving towards the midtones, I see that there are areas that has kind of like a minimal shade, and onto the lightest tones, which is, that will be the areas that don't have any shade at all. And I was thinking here, probably I can add more highlights. I can establish more highlights. So I left a couple of areas so that I can add the whites. There we go. This is just a quick sketch. So this is where the white comes in. So I'm just reserving that for the lightest areas. There we go. And that could be flowers, the lightest ones. But yeah, you get the idea. So you look at the trees as clumps of shapes, and that helps you to kind of establish differences between those shapes and clumps. There we go. So let's talk about the common mistakes that most beginners do when painting. So whenever I see kids, whenever I teach kids, one of the common mistakes they do is they put too much pressure in the brush, and they don't kind of, they just form this whole shape. So nothing is kind of natural in this sense, because what they do is I teach them to lay down the darkest color first, and then when it's time to do the highlights, they just layer it on top, and what it does, it mixes the paints that are underneath. So, and also another common mistake is they paint within that shape. So you're just reestablishing whatever that irregular shape you began with, and it's just another color, and there's no gradient or transition. So what you want to do is to have this symphony of colors that are kind of like harmonized in such a way that, there we go, I'm doing the pattern, I'm just going outside just outside the border of the shape and not tapping it, all right? So just tapping it lightly in contrast to what I'm doing on the right side, and going in the zigzag pattern so that it just creates this gorgeous texture. Those are kind of like suggestion of the leaves that are going in and out. So after doing that, we're going to be just doing a couple of shapes, basic shapes for the acrylic. Or yeah, if you guys have any questions, just type them here in the chat, but I'm just going to have to continue. Um, There we go. So I just used the tonal value technique here. This is one of the bushes, and it's circular shape, and it has this darkest areas at the bottom. And just focus on one. Don't do the whole trail, okay? So just focus on one. So for the brush, these kinds of bushes at least, you use the round brush so that it's kind of, because the leaves are kind of everywhere, all over the place, and sometimes they're not trimmed. So that's really beautiful for you to be able to capture that. And as I go towards the topmost part, the highlights, I'm going to be doing the yellow and tapping it lightly. There we go. Now this is a little wet than what I've expected it to be, but that's already a suggestion of a bush. And you may also notice that your style may come out depending on the brush that you're going to be using, how you approach it, the manner of tapping that you do, the angle of brush, angle you're holding the brush. So yeah, that's basically how you make a bush. I think that's pretty straightforward. Pretty much the same with the trees that we did earlier. For the short and long grass, I'm just going to lay down my foundation right here, the ground or the soil. And I know I could have used a flat brush, but I probably couldn't find it anywhere. So I just used that. So we're just going to skip that part and let that dry and proceed with the trees or foliage. There we go. So you can also use a flat brush to pretty much block off the shape of trees that are clumped together. So these are trees that are not solitaire trees. These are trees that are you can find like probably in a nice scene. They're kind of like lined up together. Look at them as friends, you know. So they're a clump of hot mess there. So what I usually do is start from the top, going to the bottom when I'm laying down the next color, which is green in this case, which is the midtone. And when you're doing the midtone, you want to start at the top because that's where most of your paints. I mean, you have a lot of paints at your brush, and as you go down, it becomes less. So it creates this natural gradient, and then you're going to move to the next color, which is yellow in this case. So like I'm showing you here, I'm starting at the top. And as I go towards the highlight, the areas that I cover become more or less. So if I'm going down earlier for the green to like probably 80%, of this whole block of shape that I established, then I'm probably just going to go 40%. So that's a basic suggestion of trees or foliage there. Let's go back to the short grasses. So you can create short grasses using fan brush. Again, doing simple flicks. There we go. Or if you don't like that effect, because sometimes it just doesn't, give off that gorgeous vibe. I tried to focus this flat brush, but it didn't. So I'm just going to use a flat brush that is, again, frayed. The more frayed, the better. And I'm just going to use it to establish depth. And I added more short grasses here. There we go. And you can also tilt it sideways. depending on how much you need it. So for the long grass, usually these flat brushes work if it's like a real cluster, but if it's a long grass that is probably like um, tapering at the end, then it probably might not work because the bristles of the fan or the flat brushes really clump together. Now, for the fan brush, I like it because you can twist and turn your long brushes in a certain manner. So if you're working in a animated or romanticized landscape, this might be perfect. As you can see here, it looks like they're dancing. And if you want that kind of effect, then the fan brush is perfect for that. So there we go. Okay, and next is the trees that are nearby. So what I meant here is the trees that are nearby are the trees that are in your foreground, part of your foreground. So you have a lot of focus there, more details than the trees or foliage on the left. So you kind of want to do the same though. Say, for example, this is a solitary tree. Establishing the background first or the darkest areas. Probably this is a high contrast tree. Um, so I'm just going to establish the midtones, pretty much the same technique, but just notice how I tap in a random fashion, and it's very minimal. The movements become minimal as you go along the highlighted areas. So there we go. And I'm just gonna add like a branch or a trunk. Sorry, a trunk, because it's part of your foreground. The trunk probably shows, unlike in the trees or foliage on the left. It's probably hidden among those huge clumps of leaves, probably. Let's just say. So there's that. And then we also have beech trees. I usually just call them beech trees because you find them at the beach. But these are your coconuts, probably. So just do a quick rigger brush. And I just thought that I'd show you this one because it's also another type of tree that you might be struggling with. And there are lots of brushes that you can use it. So you can use rather. So what I usually do is establish the backbone of each leaf. So using a rigger brush, make sure you have enough moisture in your brush so that it doesn't do this dry brush effect like it did in mine. You may use a fan brush to have this kind of effect, as you can see here. And again, the more frayed, the more destroyed your fan brush is, or your flat brush, I'm sorry, the better. And then I'm using a fan brush now. Let's see if that's any different. So I'm just gonna do like a quick motion. That is beautiful, isn't it? There we go. I try to move in a different direction, but it's not as beautiful as I'm planning it to be. So always start from the initial line that you created going downwards, and it always feathers out. There we go. So adding different colors. This one's a little bit too much, but I like it. And again, make sure you still have enough water in your brush so that it doesn't do a dry brush effect. You can also use a round brush, but look what it does. I don't like it because it creates this huge clumps. It kind of looks like fingers. So we don't want that. We want some sort of lines that are kind of like going thin as you go towards the end. And this is a round brush again. There we go. So those are the different kinds of brushes applied to this single beech tree. We used it as an experiment, and this round brush, I just added like several random lines. So that's pretty much it for your different kinds of trees. We're gonna focus on trunks now. So for trunks, you can use a dry brush technique, which I usually use for watercolor. So for the trunks that are kind of like a little farther from you, you may use the rigger brush. So just establish your blacks or your darkest areas, and then add your lightest areas, whichever the light is hitting that trunk. And also, I'm going to be doing this dry brush technique here. These are black areas, which I swiped already with paint earlier. So most important thing is your layer is already dry, and the brush that you're going to be holding, or there we go. So I'm removing excess moisture or paint from the brush, and here you put a lot of pressure on your brush so that we have a dry brush effect. Now, that means I don't have enough contrast, so the brown doesn't show up. So I decided to add just a little bit of white so that it has enough contrast so that you can see it. Again, push down and swipe real quick. I was told that in Chinese painting, these are called flying whites. So that's gorgeous. um, but yeah, these are pretty much, I use it for branches, and it's pretty much a technique that I so enjoy doing. So you can also go back and forth, but don't go more than 3 times when doing this dry brush technique, because the more you go back and forth in your strokes, um, the more that you're just creating this block of shape. What you're doing is basically just reestablishing your shape, and that defeats the purpose of the dry brush technique. So just confidently swipe that real quick. Now, for a textured bark, I'm pretty sure you guys have seen this. So what I usually do is I just lay down kind of like a brick pattern, so that it alternates. And then you also may want to change the shape every now and then, and also the color. So I know it sounds, it looks a little controlled and not natural today, but now, sorry. But we're just going to fix that real quick. And yeah, as you can see, it kind of looks like one of those textured barks where there we go. The bark is a little lifted, and I'm just reestablishing the highlighted areas, and a couple more fixes. Then that is gonna make a quick suggestion of a textured bark. So this is probably for those trees that are really up close in your piece. There we go. Let's just add a little bit more highlight. Okay, and after this, you're going to be done. So if you're planning to paint along today, well, good for you. Just make sure you have your canvas panel or your canvas board. I'm going to be using this sketchbook. This is my sketchbook, Etchr A6 size, in landscape. And I covered it because I bring it everywhere and it gets dirty, and it's one of the best ways for you to hide it. So here I'm also showing you a couple of those sketchbooks where I've done the same technique of foliage in watercolor. But this time we're going to be doing something like this. This one I did for a workshop. It's done in watercolor, but it took more time. And this is my primed sketchbook and portrait this time. So I started to fill that up with memories already. And if you have something similar, if your sketchbook is kind of like has this cloth-like texture, then you may follow along. Okay. So this sketchbook is primed, by the way, with gesso of 2 to 3 layers. Oh yeah, I find it more difficult when it's black is the first layer, especially when you're establishing your lightest tones. It also plays acrylic also plays a role. The brand that you use also plays a role. Sometimes the acrylics are just too thin. It acts like watercolor, just like what you've seen earlier when I was establishing the texture of the bark. So what I usually do there is just lay down whites on areas where I wanted to stand out. So if it's a mountain, then I just generally do like a quick mountain shape or just paint it all white. So, but yeah, I chose black for that specific purpose because I believe I have extra gesso during that time. So we don't want to waste put anything to waste. So I used that black gesso to cover up my sketchbook and taped the edges with a thin masking tape. And see here, what I'm doing here is I'm doing the flat soil or the initial ground for this piece. This is a reference photo, but what I want to um, show you is you can paint anything from imagination using these concepts. So this is a nara tree. This is the a tree from the Philippines. It has these gorgeous yellow blooms, and I'm just gonna quickly trace the shape or do a quick drawing rather based on what I think the shapes uh, would look like. And yes, Bev, that gesso. um, all right, so here are the branches, and I'm starting to circle or block in certain shapes where I think these clumps of areas would be. And you can see here the yellows at the top, those are not highlights, those are actually flowers. And I wanted to it's very important for you to establish the shapes here because the flowers tend to sit or show at the top part of these clumps or clusters. So that's a beautiful tree over there. um yeah, so right here, I'm reestablishing the shapes with a darker pencil. You can't do that with watercolor, but you can with acrylics. Um, so yeah, we're just going to be painting this beautiful reference photo. Um, yeah, beautiful tree as well. Really, it's also smells good. It's Philippines national tree. So um, yeah, I'm really proud of painting this. This is a Donna Dewberry brush. You'll remember it having this kind of like even uh, f- bristles. I gave up on that because it doesn't work well with the sketchbook. The sketchbook just has too much tooth that you have to use an uneven brush, uneven bristles, so that you can get into the nooks and crannies of those textures. So kind of like a toothbrush. That's why it has. Anyway, um, so I'm just gonna be establishing the background here, and you can um, paint everything black first, even like the area where the tree is. But I just found it easier to isolate the tree, the shape of the tree, so that it's easier for me to find it later on. But if you prefer to move in a freehand style, then yes, that would be okay. Hello, Maria. Oh, is it Mara? Okay. There we go. So I'm just laying down the black areas. And if you haven't primed your sketchbook, this may be a little harder for you, and you're gonna figure out that it's eating up a lot of your paint. That's true, but I swear it's gonna be all worth it. Now, this painting journey is really funny and stressful in a way because I at some point I could not find the subject, but just enjoy the process and um, yeah, enjoy the process of me struggling. But yeah, now I'm just going for the background and adding the midtones, I believe. Thanks, Bridget. There we go. So I think I'm prepping my brush here because I forgot the sky. Imagine that. So I already laid down the bushes, but I forgot the sky. So I'm just gonna do a quick mix of blue and white paint so that we can have the gorgeous sky. I could have added that mountain, but I just decided that it was too much details already clumped in one small sketchbook. So I decided to omit that. And again, it's your artwork anyway, so nobody knows that there was a mountain behind that reference photo or that not a tree. Sorry. And yeah, it definitely ate up a lot of my paints here. So there we go. Yeah. I found it relaxing and also satisfying for me to paint my sketchbooks because I don't like seeing it white and dirty, becoming dirty through time, you know? So, yeah, nobody knows. But you're pretty much hiding everything with a beautiful piece, so should be proud of that. Um, Okay, so now that I have established the sky, I made it more blue than the reference photo. Now I'm just gonna work my way towards the bush. Now, as you can see here, my green is kind of becoming lighter than my original mix. That's because my blue sky isn't dry yet, and I already charged it with acrylic. Um, if you noticed that happening, I think that's okay, but it would be best for you to let the layer dry first. I did not because I was just too excited to complete this piece. So again, using the same technique earlier, I'm starting from the top, going down, selecting areas where there would be highlights. Don't look at each of the leaf and, be stressed out with the foliage. Look at it, try to squint your eyes and look at where the lightest tones will be. Look at where the colors stand out. Look, the yellows for acrylic, the one that I'm using here at least, actually don't stand out as much as I expected it to be. So normally I would use yellow with white so that it really stands out and not blend in. So this is what Bridget was mentioning earlier, that black, it's hard when you're working with a black as the first color. The colors tends to blend in. So now I have this bush at the back, I guess, of the nata tree. My subject is still left empty, but we're going to have to fill that in real quick or in a while. And I'm starting to, I guess, infiltrate the shape of the nata tree. And before I do that, I'm just gonna use the spare green that I have here. There we go, to create the shadow. Just because I love those that shade, and if you have this dried brush effect, make use of that. Oh, thank you. If you guys have been following along today, by the way, let us know. And if you're covering your sketchbook, I'm pretty curious with what you're going to be coming up with. So there we go. So I'm starting with the midtones. I remember there were two approaches, midtones, dark to light, and then the darkest tones going to light. I decided with just going with the midtones first, just because it's more abundant, but later on you'll notice how I slowly ruined this, but was able to redeem it. But yeah, it's part of the process, so don't give up. Just teaches you how to not give up. So here are the probably the clumps, and you notice how I'm slowly touching the background already. And the difficult or the challenging part here is if your midtone and your background is kind of like the same color and it touches, then you kind of like lose the subject every now and then. So make sure you still have at least like a good grasp of what your subject looks like. So there we go. As much as possible, I'm not touching the background yet. I wanted to make sure that I still have like at least a silhouette, so that I don't get lost. I easily get lost whatever I'm painting. So um, alrighty then. Okay. Yep. Yeah, this is perfect even for watercolor. You can use the same technique for watercolor, but in watercolor, you probably would be establishing the lightest tones first and use the tapping technique for the round brushes at the end, and using the dark tones. Um, the thing with watercolor, I guess, is to just make sure that you're slowly adding or tapping them um, at the end. Yay! Okay, so now I'm adding the dark tones, and as you can see, I'm starting to lose the shape right here, and it's, yeah, it really is a little. I'm getting a little anxious at this stage, but again, that's part of the process. Sometimes that happens, that you lose your subject. Um, yeah, but it's fun when you find your way around it. So now I'm also adding. I think I'm going back to. Oh, okay. I'm going back to the midtones. And adding. There we go. I had decided to add some highlight, a little bit lighter. Um, but since my brush is to, I use my finger. Since my brush is loaded with paint already, it did not give that foliage effect, the one that kind of, what do you call this? That soft gradient. Because right now, even if I'm just lightly tapping, the tip of the brush is filled with paint. So what it gives you is just bulks of shapes, which is happening right now. So this is a little bit stressful for me, but that is okay. I just have to believe in myself that I'm gonna find my way through this whole mess of foliage, and I'm gonna reestablish my nata tree. Um, and yeah, so I decided to just fill in the whole shape anyway, because that's the pretty much the direction I'm going. And see, you can see here I'm wiping excess paint because that has already been too much. Yes, Mirta, that's absolutely true. You definitely can use this with gouache. I use this a lot with gouache, especially when um, doing plein air or painting on site, on the spot painting. There we go. Yeah, so you definitely can use this technique with gouache as well, because it dries easily. It's kind of like in the middle of watercolor and acrylic. And yes, it was a messy middle, Judith. So I decided I'll just treat that as a blank canvas and start again, I guess. This is a filbert brush, which you commonly use for watercolor, but I use it for these kinds of scenarios wherein, if you look at the reference image, the flowers are concentrated at the top. So it pretty much helps actually in this case, because they're clustered, and it gives me already the suggestion that this is where the flowers will be. And as you can see, the reference photo is kind of on the warmer side. Mine is kind of like on the cooler side. Again, that's okay. So now you just can see a lot of filbert brush strokes, and it doesn't look organic, right? It's still, we're still not there. We're going there, but still not there. So I'm just pretty much establishing the flowers here. So there we go. Okay. And I think I added more flowers than what is expected. So as you can see, it's there's not much flowers at the bottom part, but I added more. Who cares? I mean, I like it that way. So um, there we go. Uh, and one technique, I think, there we go. So I think I'm adding the highlights here, the lightest areas on the top. And again, if you're going to be adding the highlights, you're going to reserve it in the topmost areas. And this is using the round brush already without too much paint. You're using the texture of the tip of this round brush, the frayed one. So, and by doing that, you're already starting to see that the flowers or the effect or the texture you're creating here is kind of slowly spreading out, and it creates this beautiful gradient. I added a little bit of brown just because I wanted a little warmth there. There we go. So I'm tap, tap, tap. I don't know whichever cases you would tap. Probably in makeup, if you're doing makeup, you would want to like lightly tap areas in your faces, right? So just treat treat the stage gently. This is an important part. I was adding black, and I'm not tapping it in wave-like motion. I'm simply tapping it in random areas just to disrupt that whole yellow strip of shape that I created. Um, so later on, I'm gonna be doing that again. There we go. So that's beautiful because what you did with the filbert brush earlier, there's this whole clump of shape, right? By adding these like strong black, this is like very random and the lightest tap among them all, I guess. You're pretty much breaking them apart. And by doing so, you're creating this final stage of texture wherein these flowers are not really clumped that much, but they're clumped, but also like you know uh naturally organic and flowing in their own way. So yeah, just by that simple black tapping motion, it's not a wave like motion like what you usually do with foliage, but it just exactly creating good depth. There we go. But yeah, I imagine it as the flower is starting to pop up even more, not just a clump of shape. So the trunk is pretty much easy. It's just a brown and the highlight, and later on, I think I'm gonna add like a little bit of shape or a darker area here. There we go. Because it's a little too light, considering that there's a lot of greens at the top of it. So that was a little bit gray, but I like it though. And I'm adding branches in between. As you go towards the top of the tree, it um, becomes more thin. It's like a hand. It's like your hand. So the palm of your hand are like the branches, and you see that in nature as well. So that's how beautiful it's made. And that's pretty much it. You can varnish this in whatever way you want: satin finish, matte finish. Um, And this is the exercise sheet that we did today. And the final pieces, rather, are these gorgeous sketchbooks. So if you have a spare sketchbook you want to do this with, then probably you can do that. Okay, so that was a lot of talking, but thank you so much for sticking.
All right, so let's see if there are any final questions. If anybody does have final questions, please put them in the chat now. And in the meantime, I'm going to drop in the link for our feedback survey where you can let us know what you thought of today's class. And if you did follow along or you plan on doing this later, we would absolutely love to see what you've done. So I'm also going to put in the link to our Facebook page and our Instagram tags in case you would like to share.
Yeah, we'd be curious to know.
I want to see everybody's different trees. Okay, so let's get the Facebook group in here.
Yay.
There you go. And let me get you Kathleen's Instagram and our tag.
Thank you, Kitty. Yeah, if you followed along, we'd be curious to know what you did today. Probably not the same reference photo. You can apply this to like a different reference photo, but just use the hashtag Etchr Studio. And if you do this in your sketchbook, then that would be fun. I'm really curious to know what your trees or your foliage or your, I don't know, bushes would look like. So, yeah, this one's a mountain. The other one, the landscape one, that's a it's a sea of clouds, shot of sea of clouds. It doesn't look like that, but yeah, when you look at it from afar, it kind of like suggests that. So, yeah, that was fun.
I'm curious to see what people will do too with just the trees that are native to where they live.
Oh,
That'll
yeah,
be really cool seeing the textures that they come up with.
exactly. Yeah.
Let's see, one more thing I'm going to drop into the chat here is the link to Kathleen's other class that she has with us, where she shows you how to do a beautiful watercolor bird.
Birdies.
Birdies. Here's love birdies. Okay, so that is in the chat. So I'm not seeing any more questions. So yeah, please do share your work with us. And
Yay.
Kathleen, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And everyone, thank you for spending this time with us today. And until we see you next time, make more art.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.